it's like, you know, he starts off, he talks about it a little bit, and he goes, you know, it's like you have to have that consciousness of self to do anything. I mean, to go look for a job, to try and walk or talk, for that matter. That's that identity of self. That's that physical side, and then there's the spiritual side. See? But once again, like he does throughout the book, like it is throughout the book, there's things that we won't call them misinformation, but that are sort of misleading if you're not really paying attention. And
okay, so then if you're actually looking at the card itself, the way he's like this,
no, that part's fine. That part's accurate.
No, am I saying that that's actually representing, you know, the trilogy again? The
correct, correct. And also that old hermetic or occult saying, as above, so below, boom, 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 man in the center, earth, God. The man in the center, earth, God, type thing. The place that he misleads you, and this happens quite a bit throughout the book, but the person that studied the book, somebody like Kayla, who's, you know, been studying with me for 30 years and probably read the thing 10 dozen times, they catch the point, like when he says, when he's talking about the binaries and he talks about light, shadow, half shadow, you see the real binary, right? I mean, let's stay clear. Remember, let's remember last week. See, light, dark is the binary. Shadow is the neutral point, is the middle point. You see what I'm saying? In other words, he doesn't actually mislead you. See, he's giving you two of them, but the third one is actually that middle point. In other words, the shadow is the middle. You know, like he uses life, death, instead of birth, death, with life in the middle. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. In other words, he's trying to force you into going, what, until you finally get it. It's not necessary. We do it a little easier. Also, we ask you to be very, very aware of the fact that the book was written over 60 years ago, and where he talks about the preference of the black races, the red races, or the white races, there's an irrelevancy there. That's no longer politically correct. But euphemistically, he was dealing with the spiritual trine of the 3' spirit bodies, yellow, blue, and green. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was dealing with that base trinity. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, if you want to do it that way, or all religions have that base trine aspect. See, he was dealing with that seraphim, cherubim, Elohim context, the 3 angel bodies that you deal with in creation.
Which is which? Which corresponds to which?
When you deal with the mutability factor, you see, when he deals in there, he goes, you know, like colors would be the black races, see, and geometry would be the red races, which include the yellow races, and numbers, the white race. You might say that the numbers are pretty much cherubim, and the hard color aspects would be seraphim, and the symbols would be Elohim. To put that in context, the green spirit body, their path, their pathway is more defined, more number-oriented. You'll find that now anything I say in regards to groups of people is very, very generalized. But the green spirit body dominate the military, the police, and the big CEOs of the great big multinational corporations. The blue spirit body, which is by far the most numerous, actual individual people-wise, it probably represents just over 60% of the population of the planet. They have found themselves in a very unique position. This spirit body averages only a few foot, where the yellows and greens that average 14 foot and up. Basically, now that's nobody's putting anybody down when we say this. This is basically because, well, if we deal with it from a dogmatic point, they're responsible for the massive population growth the planet's experienced. There's only X amount of spirit body, and so it got smaller per individual as a result of that. Now, as you deal with it more on a from a conceptual point of view, there are really only three spirit bodies. I mean, this whole concept of universal consciousness is all the yellow spirit bodies become one, all the blues become one, all the greens become one. That's what has to happen before the whole movie is finished. But most of your philosophers, teachers, altruist preachers, research type scientists, they're going to be yellow. The yellow spirit body is more... The yellow spirit body is a spirit body that goes to, you know, like Unity and the other non-hard dogmatic churches. They're not quite as stuck on things. And now there are adapts in every spirit body. Not quite as many as in the blues as there are the yellow and greens, because of the average size of the spirit body. But you know, there are blues with 100-mile spirit bodies. You know, I mean, they're a high adept, you know, seraphim. And it happens a couple of times a year. Seraphim or a cherubim comes to me, then I direct them to a seraphim or cherubim teacher, because of the difference between symbols, numbers, and colors. I mean, we all use all three, but it is much easier for a cherubim to deal with things quantitatively with numbers. It's much easier for a seraphim to deal with the color aspects. You know, so a seraphim, if they were dealing with the tree of life, boy, they'd have fun with that. They would have a tendency to blend the colors together instead of separate them. In other words, if they took the red and yellow, they may have a little trouble coming up with orange. I mean, they'd have them overlapped. They'd still have the orange there, but they wouldn't actually identify that second power center as an individual color. Did I lose you?
Oh, got the sound.
Did you understand what I said, Nancy, Cindy, Philippa? And so it's not a matter of one being better than the other or more powerful than the other or anything like that. This is one of the first things you have to recognize as you start going through this process. Karma basically dictates that every individual soul experience every possible thing during the course of its various lifetimes until it finally achieves completion and contact, full contact with the whole. Well, at the beginning, let's go back to the beginning. You know, you've got these 3 spirit bodies, but all the spirit bodies have to do the same process. And so you picture this big swimming pool type thing. And at the beginning, it seemed a little rude at the time, but the yellow spirit body was sort of the bad guy. The yellow spirit body was sort of the greedy one. You see, now it's the green spirit body. But a lot of times, one of the biggest problems I have with people is they'll turn around and go like, they'll think they're better because they're the good guy. You know, they want universal consciousness, they want to do away with hunger, they want to do away with war, you see. And but you've got to remember, we wouldn't have been able to do all our bad stuff back then 10,000 years ago if these guys weren't being the good guy to keep things in balance. So anytime you run into them real greedy people, you know, just spiritually thank them for allowing you to be what you are. See? So somehow it's all part of the whole. It's sort of like that Hitler-Gandhi thing I talk about. It's sort of like that. The biggest binary that we deal with here in this first chapter is that separation between physical and spiritual. And allowing one's individual space to move anywhere on that line of concept. The concept of consciousness includes the physical and spiritual. Do you see what I mean there? If you take the consciousness itself, that's the neutral point, and you've got the physical and spiritual. Now, as we begin this process, you remember we did the little shin fella, the fool that ain't got the balls to jump off the cliff, you know, see, running through that. Now, see, this fella here is now experiencing consciousness, and he has to go from the physical to the spiritual and back on everything. And reality is much more complex now, and as it becomes even more complex, which it's almost sure to do, it requires that much more travel back and forth. You can't sit there and just pray for something and get angry if it doesn't happen. I mean, the theosophical value of God helps those who help themselves is part of this. So you have to move from that spiritual side towards the physical side to achieve what's necessary to have and support your family and do the things you need to do and stuff like that. So there's a constant motion between that binary. So it sometimes, and I'm sure everyone's experienced it at various times in your life, you are in a position where you have to act very physical. A few hundred years ago, if you wanted shelter, you had to cut a few trees or move a few rocks around to build it. You know, now if you want shelter, you got to do something else, whatever, but it's still the same thing. You're still doing that to achieve shelter. See, so while you're doing that, you're on the physical side of the seesaw. Well, what Hermetics does is Hermetics says, you know, going to church for a few hours, a couple of days a week, isn't enough time on the spiritual side. You see, so you define this link in self in such a way, you define your consciousness in such a way that you control the way you move. You can be swinging the shovel and it's still a physical side, but you can put your head in the spiritual place while you're doing it. I mean, you can actually use that physical activity as a form of meditation or prayer. See, so it's this first card represents that concept of being able to control your consciousness, of understanding the binaries, so that you can move along that line. One of the nicest things about developing this ability, and this will happen in the first 3 cards, I'm hoping for everyone. Cindy has already got it pretty good. I explained to her how to do some things that she's been using on her one of her clients. That seems to be working very, very effective. And that's a very, very spiritual thing, and yet it's using using the physical body to achieve it. But it's an extremely spiritual thing when you can actually remove a negative from somebody's vehicle. You see what I mean? That's a pretty spiritual thing, you see? And so as we develop that ability, then we move on into the next way and the next way and the next way until finally we have the ability to go at any point, just like recognizing the opposites all the time. We can have an extremely difficult physical situation and still make that situation extremely spiritual, irregardless of what it is. And transitions are rough. I mean, when I lost my wife, I had a little trouble even making that spiritual, and I'm supposed to be a hotshot. There's difficult times, but you know, when I'm gardening, to me it's spiritual. This is my gardening shirt. But hey, how do you like my mohawk?
It's coming in nicely. The last of the Mohegans.
I don't know how long I'll be able to stand it. Every time Aggie and I go to the market or anything, people are starting to look at me funny.
Well, color it green or something.
Lavender. Aggie said we use beet juice. It's a fresh garden beet juice. But the concept in dealing with that is not to push the issue. See, it doesn't work if an individual just goes, okay, well, I'm going to force myself to think spiritual about this. That's not thinking spiritual. That's still physical. It has to happen inside your noggin. So that's why that binary recognition is so important. To where you're automatically seeing both sides, doing what you need to do, whether it be on the spiritual side or the physical side, no matter how far away it is from the absolute neutral point, and still experiencing the situation equidistant in the same intensity on the opposite level. So a lot of people get a pretty good grip on this, and they don't have a lot of trouble visualizing and getting a grip on how to manifest the spiritual concept that's directly related to what they're doing physically. The more difficult one is manifesting the physical concept for what you're doing spiritually. See, it's pretty easy to relate to whatever you're dealing with physically and come up with some type of spiritual balance for it, but it's very, very hard to come up with a physical balance for the spiritual. And it just takes a little bit of playing with. Okay? Now, in this concept here, in this card, we do not give you a method of expression. The second card, Beth, is the method of expression. Right now, we're trying to understand the principle of consciousness. And you're certainly aware of the fact that even though it says man, it means mankind. It don't mean male or female. When it, you know, I mean, the book was written back before all this politically correct stuff was around. But conceiving of the physical, well, it's easy to conceive of it when you're in church because you're sitting in there and all of a sudden we all stand up and sing together. Well, that's taking a physical concept. But when you're working on someone, Cindy, when you're working on someone, see, now there is a perfect balance, physical and spiritual. There's a perfect balance, physical and spiritual. When you're doing one of them actual energy things, that's all spiritual. But it's easy to see its physical counterpart because it's solving a problem, it's healing a physical thing. See, so that's the type of consciousness we're dealing with. So when you play with the binaries, and when you're looking for them opposites, always remember, I'm going to go back over here to the board. Unfortunately, I'm not a real good artist. I'm not really good with my drawing. But you remember the triangle, right? See, so over here you got physical. Here. And over here you got spiritual. And you want to be in both places at once, conceptually, but you have to be in one place or the other, at least. See, anything this side of the neutral point on top would be spiritual. Anything this side would be physical. So, when Cindy is doing a massage, see, the physical part's here, the spiritual part should be equal from it. It shouldn't go from here to here. It'll be unbalanced. It'll be unbalanced. So, if you're doing a horrible example, you're actually in a minor automobile wreck. I had pretty physical crunch, bump, boom, boom, boom. You okay? Is everybody okay? Boom, boom, boom. That's pretty physical, right? So the spiritual's got to go all the way over here to balance that. So the ability to do that means when that happens, even if it's the other person's fault, you don't jump out of your car and go, oh, you stupid son of a gun, what the hell you hit me for, blah, 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 blah. You go, are you okay? That's the spiritual response. First thing out of your mouth is their welfare. Not you ruined my car. Even if they did ruin your car. But very, very few things are that abstract. Most of them are going to take place, we'll say, well, let's say probably 30, 40 degrees of that center spot. Most of life exists within that 30, 40 degree part. As an individual becomes stronger and stronger and stronger mentally, they actually get to where they're closer and closer and closer to that center point. And so that makes the coexistence of the binaries much, much easier. It makes it much, much easier. If you allow, and you know, there's actually an argument about which side is active and which side is passive. And they can both be either one, as long as you're in charge. If you just allow life to happen. Remember one thing, here's one of my favorite things to say. I was reading a friend of mine's saying, you know, they got this go with the flow. You know, you've heard that, people say, oh, go with the flow, go with the flow. You don't want to go with the flow. Even dead fish float downstream. You know, if you're going to lay eggs and create something, you got to swim upstream, jump over the little dams and stuff. You know, finding yourself is work. I mean, it's work. It's just mental work, but it's work. So you have to try to isolate various circumstances. So when you're playing around, as you start fooling with the concept of bath and expression, you say, okay, now you're washing the dishes. I know you probably got a machine you put them in, but you still probably rinse them off first. Okay? What would be a spiritual counterpoint to that? What would it be, Nancy?
Your thoughts while you're doing the dishes?
Correct. Correct. I mean, you've done the dishes so many times that you certainly don't have to think, oh, now I will rinse this, and this goes in this slot in the dishwasher, or whatever. I mean, it's automatic, right? So, what's happening in your head during that process? One of the biggest drawbacks to real hard spiritual work is a lot of times while people are doing that, they're going like, now how am I going to trick hubby into wearing that purple necktie when we go to the party tonight? Do you see what I mean? So all of a sudden you're taking your physical over here and doing dishes, and you moved it out here instead of balancing. Okay? If you want hubby to wear the purple necktie, you know, just hide the rest of the ties. I mean, you make it work. The easiest, you know, the easiest way to achieve something is sometimes by moving away from. You catch that? Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes moving away from. So when you're trying to get your child to do something, you know, if you go, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, you know, they reach that certain point in their growth where all of a sudden it just makes them do the opposite. So a lot of times you can get them to do what you want by saying, well, you probably don't want to do this. I mean, you've got that. That's the same, see, that's that same aspect, that same technique. So if you're going to deal with this conceptualization between physical and spiritual,
Yes.
if you're pushing yourself to achieve a spiritual point for some given physical thing, if you push trying to get it, you actually move yourself further into the physical. That's what I was alluding to when I say you're doing the dishes and you're worried about what clothes someone's going to wear that evening. That's moving it further into the physical. Achieving the spiritual aspect during the physical requires nothing more than slowing down. That doesn't mean slow down your physical activity. It means slow down your thought process. A lot of times people will turn around, they'll get very, very, very close to achieving their sixth and seventh senses, and they'll stop pushing at it so hard it runs away from them. And it's a matter of relaxation. It's just a matter of relaxation. I don't see what. Ask me questions. Let me make sure I get this across. Binary. The whole thing is about binary, but the binary of consciousness. We're not interested in the light-dark binary or the time-space binary, other than for use to understand how binaries work. What we're interested in is that binary and the ternary of consciousness itself. That's the physical spiritual with consciousness as the balance point. Pretty simple. Cindy can use her work. She's got an excellent tool there. But you have to come up with some type of, and it has to be individual. Everyone's different. But there has to be some aspect of self that you can use as a mnemonic to push that spiritual side. Like, correct, if my memory serves me correct, Nancy, you're an usher. It's a church, right? See? So, anytime you couldn't get that physical thing to relax enough, see, you could just use your experience as an usher. You could say, now this is a little tricky here, but I'm not sure your mind works like this, but, you know, wow, I wonder if I could get more people wearing red sitting over here in this section. Oh, more people. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, you can move yourself right into that ushering position, that spiritual position. You're in church, and everybody's in this real nice place, peace, love, good vibes, hippie bees, and just by coming up with some concept that you would use like that. Now, I know at Unity people sit in little cliques. You know, when I'm there, I'm always in this one, within a couple of rows of this one place, and with the same 20 people around. Yeah. But, you know, you can make it a spiritual exercise by saying, like, well, I know this little clique always sits over here. I wonder if I could move them over there. You know, I mean, you can, you know, you have to trick yourself, and you have to give yourself a mnemonic that automatically moves your head back to that spiritual place while you're doing the physical. But then, while you're actually in the spiritual place, when you're at church, when you're ushering, when you're doing that, you still have to come up with a physical modality. That's our homework this week.
Well, I stay very busy there.
Huh?
I stay very physical there.
Yeah, you're very physical while you're at church because you're running up and down the aisles, passing out this, and boom, and that, and the other thing, and keeping that whole organizational thing going, but you're still in the spiritual place when you're doing it.
Correct.
See? But when Cindy's there, she's just sitting there listening.
She ushers too.
Oh, you do? Okay. See, but
Nothing in the choir.
when I'm there, I'm just... See, I have to find something physical to balance it out. So when I'm there, I look around at everybody's orders, like I'll look at the little band playing and stuff, and I'll say, oh, that poor booger up there is sick, you know what I mean? I get physical with the orders. I enjoy doing that. But everyone needs their personal wing. So you have to be able to go to that spiritual place. Now for you, that spiritual place is very physical because of the volunteer work you do at the church. You still got to be able to go to that spiritual place the rest of the week. And you're not going to be running around taking care of people when you go to that place. It's going to be just you and that place. You have to find the mnemonic to put you there. And everybody's mnemonic is a little different. But you have to develop some type of mnemonic. You know, I see yours, it's easy. I'm constantly all over the place. People need a mnemonic, okay? Aggie uses her little friend she created. Little Augusta lady, you know? Just take something. It has to be something. Something that allows you to immediately travel back and forth between physical and spiritual. And eventually achieves enough of a consciousness in your individual soul and your Atman to where the two are always connected. I mean, I could easily see Cindy, after the success she's had in the last week with this thing, becoming quite a healer. That's a very, very difficult thing to balance, physically and spiritually. It's an extremely difficult, very, very difficult thing. It's easy when you're working with a friend, but then when you have to make decisions, it's difficult. I mean, I'll give you an example of how easy it is to screw up. Back in the late 50s, we were just outside of Indianapolis, Louisiana. I had my whole group with me. There was like 10 motorhomes. Actually, they were converted buses, and this one lady got a reading from one of my people, and the gal come up to me after, she said, "Kujina, I don't think this woman's blind." And I said, "Wow, really?" So I said, have her come and see me. Have her come back in a couple hours when I'm done, And let me check it out. I check out, sure in hell, the woman ain't blind. Woman's been blind all her life. She's been blind. She's never seen all her life. She belongs to the local blind club. That's the wrong way to say it, but you know, there was a group where all the blind people hung around together, sort of like the senior center or something. And I told her, I said, honey, you're not blind. You know, we can fix that. Real easy, we can fix that. Her mom and dad were blind. And she was actually raised thinking she was blind. I mean, she shut it down. She shut it down. And it was a very, very, very easy thing. Very mild hypnosis, a little bit of energy work, and the woman could see. And I told her, I said, now, you have to promise everybody. You have to promise me. You don't go telling your friends that I did that. I didn't do that. You did that. I just helped you do that. It ain't going to work for anybody else. I mean, do you understand what I mean? It ain't a miracle. It ain't going to work for anybody else. Well, obviously, I mean, everybody she knew, these other blind people, well, she went, she could see him, and all of a sudden she's talking, she's all excited, da 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 da. And, you know, a couple of days later, I had about 30 people wanting me to make them see. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I actually got charged with witchcraft. I actually got arrested. Had to spend a day and a half in jail because I had to wait till Monday morning to see the judge. And I got charged. It's on the books in Indiana. I got charged with witchcraft. You know? And the judge goes, "What is this?" And I'm like, I mean, he let me go. The district attorney guy was a real butthead. He's saying he fixed this woman, and everybody knows this woman's been blind since she's been born, and he's refusing to fix these other people even though they were willing to pay. And we're saying that he's a witch or whatever kind of crap. And I'm like, I mean, they were going to put me in jail for 30 days. I mean, thank goodness they didn't have stakes and branding irons. And I told the judge, I said, Your Honor, look, please, please understand me. You know, and I told him what happened. He still couldn't get it. I said, finally, I said, let me put it like this. If I really cured her, you know, if she was really blind and I really did cure her, you know, you don't want to pick on me. And if she wasn't blind all the time and I just allowed her to understand that, then you got to throw it out anyway. You know, he thought for a few minutes and he kicked it out of court. But they actually, I mean, I actually sat in the jail for a day and a half for witchcraft because I helped the lady out. See, so when this healing thing starts, and I'm sure, you know, your cards had some pretty nice things in them, Cindy. And, you know, and you start getting all this super energy abilities and things. Watch what you're doing. No, I'm serious.
I totally believe you.
What was that, Nancy?
Oh, she says she believes you.
Right.
She understands it. Right.
It gets serious. I advise anyone that does any type of counseling work whatsoever that is not a licensed medical psychiatrist, you know, to get one of them mail order ministerial certificates. It's perfectly legitimate. It's perfectly legitimate. You know?
I don't understand what you're talking about, Kugina.
I use Universal Life Church in California. Actually, Universal Life Church is a seminary for all the Assembly of God people. I mean, that's where they get their ministerial certificates from. But you can buy one for $15, is what I'm saying. It's a mail order.
How does that stop you getting into trouble with authority?
A minister is allowed to counsel and heal, and you're allowed to.
At least in the U.S.
Anyway, and anywhere where there's freedom of religion, which includes New Zealand or the entire free world, for that matter, except for Myanmar and China and a couple of weird places. But I'll give you a perfectly clear example. Okay, I have a very, very good friend in Palm Beach, Florida. Excellent shrink. Excellent shrink. A lady friend of mine in Denver, Colorado. Excellent shrink. She was a child shrink. He was a grown-up shrink. He dealt mostly with homosexuals. And she dealt pretty much with like ADHD kids and stuff like that. They both came to a couple of seminars that I was putting on, and I introduced them to each other, and they ended up hitting it off. Weren't married yet, but they were going to try it for 6 months. It was winter time in Denver. Who the hell wants to be there unless you're going skiing? And so she went down to Florida for 6 months, and she worked right out of his office. And I mean, she's a real hotshot with the kids. I mean, she can really get something done with these kids. So all of a sudden, another lady shrink that was losing all her clients to her checked. She wasn't licensed in Florida and complained. You're talking major mess here, you know. You're talking major mess. You're talking, if they were going to be a real pain in the ass, a year in jail and $500,000. I mean, you're talking a mess. And they call me on the phone, and they say, well, what do we do? What do we do, man? This is, you know, they're coming down. You know, they sent them a letter and told them they'd be there at such and such a time, such and such a day. And I said, at the time I had the phone number, I said, but call this phone number, overnight FedEx them, you know, just stick a couple of $100 in there, don't, you know, and have them FedEx back your ordination papers and ministerial certificate and stuff. And when the state inspectors got there, she just went, that was it, dropped. That was it. That simple. See on the wall back there? See on the wall back there? Credentials of ministry for me, credentials of ministry for Agnes, and then our corporation team. It's easy. You sit down sometimes, Cindy, now you're working with a friend, so you don't have to worry about it. You know, sometimes you're working with somebody you don't even know that's got a serious problem. And maybe it don't quite work out right. You don't win them all. You got to have protection.
Right.
It costs $15.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You look it up on the net. Universal Life Church. Nothing to it. But see, that's part of a binary in itself. See, you turn around, you're helping people, but until you become a full adept and can really see the emotional and spirit body, you don't know if a situation is karmic or not. If it's a karmic situation, in other words, if its origin is from the spirit body, you might be able to move it around a little bit, but you're not going to be able to change it. In other words, you might be able to move it around a little bit for them, but you're not going to be able to change it. And people being what they are, you could assume some liability there. So before you start dealing with people you don't know real well, you should do that. I advise everybody to do it. My shaman friend that goes to Houston to work once a month. I keep telling him to do it, and he ain't done it yet. But you know, once there's a complaint, it's too late. But I need you to really work on finding a mnemonic, a personal mnemonic. Everyone. I need everybody to find a personal mnemonic between the physical and the spiritual. Something that'll trigger them. Not just one way, but either way. If you're in a spiritual place, trigger you to a physical recognition to where you can make everything both physical and spiritual at the same time. That's true consciousness. That's a true way to begin this path, where that first law of do no harm. See, as long as you're in a recognized spiritual spot during your physical processes, you're not going to do any harm. So, it's the real trick to consciousness. Getting a real firm grip on that concept of physical, spiritual, of neutralizing that binary with your consciousness. Just some mnemonic that will allow you to move back and forth. You know, I've got a good friend who's a bishop in the Catholic Church, and you know, he uses his cross.
How?
He just grabs his cross. Whether it's physical or spiritual. I mean, he could be out playing basketball, teaching the kids how to play basketball or something, and if he starts losing contact with his spiritual side, he'll grab the cross. If he's preaching and he starts losing contact with his spiritual side, he'll grab the cross and think of his physical side. But, you know, that's his mnemonic. A mnemonic, it can be a thought, it can be something, it can be a worry stone. You need some type of mnemonic. That's the homework, find a mnemonic. And, you know, it's got to be something personal. It's got to be something personal. It was like, that works. See, that's, you know, see, so they could actually use a penguin as that link because they actually managed to manifest that thought form with no concept of how it would come about. I mean, we didn't expect the penguin to walk 100 miles. You know, see, it's just some personal mnemonic. Cindy can use just the concept of massaging somebody. I think that may work there, but she might find something better. Everybody has to have their individual one. What is this mnemonic? What is the midpoint between my spiritual being and my physical being? What will constantly remind me of the other if I start to get stuck in one place? Just a mnemonic.
So the mnemonic will then bring through the connection to the spiritual, And if you need to change what you're doing, then that realization will come through.
Right. It just, the mnemonic will automatically make you recognize both sides of the paradigm. It's constantly both sides of the paradigm. Saying the only paradigm we're dealing with here in chapter 1 is the concept of consciousness. We're not dealing with concepts like speech and judgment. What we're dealing with is consciousness itself. We want to develop the ability to stay physical and spiritual at all times. And then we want to read the second chapter so we can develop the ability to express ourselves. Beth. And Beth is fun. Beth is fun. Always remember, the Old Testament starts with Beth. Barashit. Barashit. In the beginning. Barashit. Actually means before the beginning, but, you know, Barashit. And there's a lot of funny things when you study hardcore Hermetics and Masoretic and stuff. Why did God pick Beth instead of Aleph? If Aleph was the first, why did we start with Beth? See, and you get a lot of nice little parables we'll get into as we go along. But Beth is basically the concept of a throat without a tongue. It's the channel for expression, but without the ability to express. And it's also that beautiful priestess card, the female equivalent of the male magician. It's the binary, and when you're looking at it, there'll be two pillars, one light and one dark. You know, women are more balanced than men. Their egos aren't quite as volatile. So you'll have fun with Beth. Go ahead. Yes.
So would the throat with no tongue represent that it's actually coming from the spiritual instead of the self nor ego? Because the tongue, so I'm not saying it's actually coming from spirit.
No. When you deal with Beth, the concept is just the channel.
Just strictly channel.
The channel for something to come through. Is no definition that. You're going to run into the definition with the Emperor and the Empress. 3 and 4, Gimel and Dalet. See, we're building one concept at a time. See, we're going to have this, I mean, I don't think anybody's got a problem with this concept. Consciousness, you need to recognize the spiritual and physical both at the same time. It's easy. One binary, a little bit of time to find that one mnemonic that's individual for self that allows that automatic contact, automatic recognition of both sides. And then we'll get into the concept of the throat without the tongue, which is going to allow a channel for consciousness to use, whether it be physical or spiritual, see? Whether it be physical or spiritual, see? So, by doing it the way we're doing it, it's really pretty easy. I mean, within a couple of months, your head will work quite a bit different than it ever has before, in a very pleasant way. Because you'll be able to see some horrible thing happening that would normally, you know, like you're driving down the street and there's an accident and you see blood all over the place and obvious dead people. And instead of going, oh, bummer, man, I'm glad that ain't me. See, that's what happens when people see that. That fear, that ego. Boy, I'm glad that ain't me. I'm glad it ain't one of my kids or friends. But if you were in the physical, spiritual at the same time, you would go, you would actually send a little energy through that channel psychically to that soul to assist it in achieving that better place. Do you see what I'm saying? See, it becomes automatic. So instead of going, oh, what a horrible disaster, you go, you help them get to that better place. It just changes the way you think. In a pleasant way. And then once you have the channel of expression, and then you start dealing with the other concepts of the Empress, the female expression of the consciousness with the channel to express the female and then express the male. And it all follows along nicely. You'll enjoy it.